Hey, great to be with you. If you're wondering what this is, no, it's not the Invisible Man endorsing Trump or the Mummy endorsing Trump. I had a little bit of an accident last night and required a bit of a trip to emergency. So I'm not in the best of shape, but we will try to struggle through. And we hope that at the end you will give it at least one good working thumb up. I wanted to say a few words about Alan Colmes from Fox News and the star at Fox News of Hannity and Colmes. For 13 years, he was a nightly fixture on Fox News's programming as it became the dominant force in cable news. And I was an occasional co-host of his on Hannity and Colmes when Sean Hannity was out, and I played the role of the right-wing guy and Alan played the role of the left-wing guy. And he had a little thing he liked to do at the end of the show when I guest hosted, is that he would always want to check my immigration status in the country and demand to see my green card. And I always used the line, which at least used to get a laugh out of the crew. I always used to say, Alan, I'm just another hard-working foreigner doing the jobs that Americans won't do, like guest hosting with you. And he liked that too, he liked that. And then he would always rush off, because Alan used to do a TV show from, I think it was 9 to 10, and then he used to have to scoot out and hit the elevator, and in a couple of minutes, get up or down to whichever floor his radio studio was in and begin to do the Alan Colmes radio show. So in all the time I co-hosted with him, they were always very rushed goodbyes. And in a sense, he took a rushed goodbye a few days ago. Alan discovered he had a very vicious form of lymphoma, and it killed him very quickly. His last day on the air was, in fact, Inauguration Day, January the 20th. And Alan Colmes is gone now. I loved doing his radio show. He was very kind to me. Whenever I had one of my Christmas albums to promote or my cat album to promote, he would always have me on the show. And unlike many hosts who used to book me and they'd play 15 seconds of the Christmas record or the cat album and then get me to talk about whatever was happening in American politics, he actually always used to engage me in a bit of a conversation about the music as well. When I did my disco version of Marshmallow World, he suggested to me I might like to do a bossa nova version of Marshmallow World, and then he did his famous Alan Colmes grin, and I was never entirely sure whether he was serious about that suggestion, but by way of tribute, I might yet take him up on it. He was a great grinner, and I kind of will forgive a lot in a person if he can actually say something and then grin at you, and you know that he appreciates your company and you appreciate his. And there isn't a lot of that on the left and right. And I know on the left, Alan was something a bit of a, he was regarded a bit suspiciously, because he was the left-wing guy at a network that is supposed to be right-wing. I discovered when I guest hosted with him that in fact he was not the right's dupe, the right's patsy, the right's buffoon, as some no-name clod in Slate called him this week. He was in fact an extremely well-researched and lethal interviewer. And if there were people that he genuinely didn't like or that he felt were pushing too far, he could usually uncover some very devastating and damaging fact to aim like a cicatrice at their heart. And he was extremely effective as an interviewer like that. And for me personally, a little bit of the fun went out of co-hosting and guest hosting once Alan was no longer there in the chair beside me. It's odd the way the left was so unforgiving of him for engaging with the right, because in fact, that is what politics is meant to be. Politics is meant to be the art of persuasion. Right and left are meant to be in the same room. And you make your case, and the other guy makes his case, and some people are persuaded and some people aren't persuaded. And some people change from A to B, some people from B to A, and some just stay where they are. But if you're not actually in the debate, if you're not in the game of persuasion, you're not actually in the business of politics. And Alan, in that sense, was something of a throwback to the old days when there weren't conflicting ghettos in opposing corners, echo chambers talking to themselves, but people engaged in the great political conversation. And the left attacked Alan frequently simply because he did that. I liked Alan because, as I said, he could be lethal and he could attack you, but he didn't generally waste time labeling you. He would be happy to dismantle your positions, but he didn't think it was enough just to yell, you know, racist, homophobe, Islamophobe, bigot, hater, and all the rest of it. And I can stand just about anything except a twit who can't do nothing except stand there and yell labels at you, which was what Alan never did. And that is what I wanted to talk a bit about today, just because Alan Colmes' death made me reflect on that. And I don't want to be particularly partisan about it, but I do think it is a left-wing thing. I think that the old distinction between left and right, that the right, that we think they're wrong, and the left, they think we're evil, I think there is actually a lot of truth in that. I mean, these labels are all basically left-wing labels of the modern world. There are no real equivalents to them. Racist, Islamophobe, homophobe, transphobe. I said on stage in Ottawa the other day that I'm a phobia-phobe. I'm sick of all these phobias because no matter how nimble you are, there's going to be a new phobia along in another minute. And it's interesting to me that intelligent people think that labeling people is enough. I mentioned, pardon me if I take a sip, as I said, I'm a little under the weather. I didn't know this. If you're a doctor and that kind of thing, you'll know there's a big artery in the thumb. So, you know, all the blood is drained from my head. So if I pass out in the course of this, you'll forgive me. But that's why I had to take had a bit of a Marco Rubio moment there. I mentioned when I was talking about Sweden, I showed a little clip from a debate I did in Toronto last April, the Monk debate. It's a big debate at Roy Thomson Hall, which is a big venue, packed full of Toronto Liberals. And they hire prominent speakers. So I was there with Nigel Farage, who is the guy who basically won the Brexit campaign. He did something, he's never been Prime Minister or Foreign Secretary or Lord Chancellor or any of the big positions in British politics, but he has done something more consequential than any British politician since Mrs. Thatcher. He all but single-handedly determined to change the entire post-war course of British foreign policy, and he did it. He basically, starting with nothing, he got the British people to agree with him and vote that the United Kingdom should leave the European Union. So he's a guy they thought was a joke, and he demonstrated that he's not to be underestimated. And I was up against, Nigel and me, we were up against Louise Arbour, who's a former Justice of the Supreme Court of Canada, and the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights. She led war crimes investigations in the Sudan and Bosnia and other places, and chose to prosecute rape as a war crime in both the Balkans and in Sudan. So again, she is an accomplished woman and not to be underestimated. And then there was Simon Sharma, who's a big-time BBC television historian, and again, a distinguished man in his own field. And we went in there, and in these debates, they always read out what the views of the public are going in. And in this case, it was over 3/4 in favor of the motion that the Western world should admit more and more of these refugees. Give us your poor, your tired, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free. And the other nonsense from that appalling poem that turned a great statue of liberty into a third-rate statue of immigration. As I said in my closing remarks that night, it's a great the French gave the Americans a great statue, and the Americans nailed a lousy third-rate poem to it and utterly distorted and perverted the meaning of the statue that the French gave the Americans. But being nice, upscale Canadian liberals, that entire audience, or at any rate almost 80% of them, were all in favor of open borders for all the tired, the poor, the huddled masses yearning to be free, whatever it is, the wretched refuse of your teeming shores. Bring it on, more wretched refuse. The more the shores teem, the more wretched refuse from there we want. And they were all in favor of it. They were in favor of what Angela Merkel had done in Europe. And they were in favor of what the Swedes had done, as Donald Trump correctly alluded to the other day. And so we went in, Nigel and I, starting at basically a 4-to-1 disadvantage up against Louise Arbour and Simon Schama. And what was interesting to me, I showed the clip the other day, the moment when the other side went too far and they dismissed these huge mass epidemic of sexual assault that's been going on across Europe, basically from the Arctic Circle down to the Mediterranean. They thought it was funny. They thought it was kind of pathetic, me and Nigel being so hung up on sex, as if, as Simon said, we just couldn't get any action. We were kind of pathetic figures. It was sad, as he put it. And I pushed back. I pushed back very strongly. And what was interesting to me later, you know, the following day or whenever it was, I looked at some of the tweets that had been going out. And especially tweets from liberal men, like Jonathan Kay, my old editor, who's now at the Walrus magazine in Canada, and Doug Saunders from the Globe and Mail in Canada. And Doug Saunders tweeted, "Simon Schama is a genius, but his talent is wasted slapping down the bigoted porno fictions of a cartoon character." When he says the bigoted porno fictions of a cartoon character, that's me. That's me. Funny thing is, the women in the room, and it was the women whose votes changed by the end of the evening. The women in the room didn't see me as a cartoon character. They saw me as a real human being, actually explaining fairly calmly the reality of what is happening on the ground in Europe, in Western Europe. So it's not something that's hard to it's not somewhere far out on the exotic fringes of the map in Yemen or Somalia, where you put it all down to cultural differences. I explained what was happening to women like them, upscale women coming home from good jobs, living in nice suburban neighborhoods, but because of the policies of Angela Merkel, because of admitting 1.5 million fit young Muslim men, because of admitting so many young men that you actually wind up with a bigger sex imbalance in Sweden in a couple of years that it took China to muster under the 30 years of the one-child policy. Similar wealthy, moneyed, middle-class, successful Western women in Scandinavia and Germany and across Europe had their lives ruined and were being advised by local police chiefs and mayors not to go out unaccompanied in the evenings. And as a result, there was a massive swing in the vote in that room in Toronto. As the moderator subsequently announced, it was one of the biggest swings they've ever had in the history of the Munk debate, from overwhelming 4-to-1 difference opposed to the position articulated by Nigel and me that we should have prudent restraints upon this refugee tide, they had abandoned the utopian delusions of our opponents and decided that they were with us. And I think back to what the professional lefties, like Doug Saunders, talking about the bigoted porno fictions of a cartoon character, he's a smart guy. These are smart guys, I take it. They have to go to journalism school or whatever you need to do now to wind up writing at big-time newspapers in North America. But he couldn't get beyond the label, the bigoted porno fictions of a cartoon character. He saw me as a porno cartoon. And the funny thing was that once I was on that stage and explaining things to all those nice, progressive, liberal Toronto ladies, they didn't see me as a bigoted porno cartoon. They saw me as just a fellow they had a political disagreement with, explaining his policy positions relatively calmly. And as a result, they changed their mind. And it was unusual today, in today's politics, where you have these hyper-partisan camps. And it's easy to think, you know, in those terms, that there's a bunch of people over here and there's a bunch of people over there. And if it's just all about talking to people who agree with you, then basically it's tribalism. And the camps are determined by, you know, whether this bunch of people has more kids who are raised in their tribe over that bunch of people, you know, raising their tribe. But that's not what politics is. Politics is about persuasion. And politics is about going up against the other side and asking people to evaluate you not under the labels that the left hurl, racist, homophobe, Islamophobe, transphobe, whatever phobe, but actually about saying, we have a policy difference here. We disagree on immigration. We disagree on tax policy. We disagree on welfare policy. We disagree on federal bathroom ordinances. But when all you do is label people, when you label someone, you don't win the debate. You make debate impossible. Now, it's true there are racists. And actually, Alan Colmes was extremely broad-minded on that. He interviewed very memorably on his radio show one time some Ku Klux Klan guy. And yes, the Ku Klux Klan guy is a racist. He just wants to be around white people. And Alan talked to him, and Alan let him put it into his own words why he wanted to do that. And Alan pushed back and exposed him and all the rest of it. But it was actually quite an interesting and revealing discussion. There are racists on the side of the right. There are also actually, these days, a lot of racists on the side of the left. The neo-apartheid of identity politics, where what matters is not who you are as an individual. What matters is not that we judge you by the content of your character, but by the color of your skin, or the orientation of your penis, or the degree to which you have had breast enhancement surgery at this particular stage in your transitioning. The left these days judges you on everything but the content of your character. Everything but, which is why they are the ones who always reach for the labels first. I was on a very prominent Chicago radio show, and this guy, I said something about the Islamization of Europe, and some guy called up and said, that's totally racist. Well, of course it isn't racist, because actually Islam is a religion. And a religion, if you don't happen to be an adherent to it, is an ideology, in fact. It's no different from communism or fascism or conservatism or liberalism. It's just another ism. It's an idea. And ideas are subject to vigorous debate from all sides. But at any rate, he thought, and in the case of Islam, by the way, there are people with all kinds of skin colors who happen to hold that view. Just for the record, people from Egypt belong, the United States government puts people from Egypt in the same category as people from Sweden under the racial classification policies of the United States government. They're all Caucasians. Actually, you know where you find a lot of Caucasians? In the Caucasus. They're all Caucasians, and most of them are Muslims, which is why it's a big headache for Mr. Putin and his government. So these distinctions are not useful when you're talking about Islam. But this guy calls up on this radio show after I've been talking about Muslim immigration. He says, well, that's just totally racist. And I said to him, calling someone totally racist is totally gay. And at that point, his head began spinning, and he ended the call. These are labels. And labels are fine if you're in the schoolyard, and you're in kindergarten, and you're in grade 1. But actually, by grade 3, you should be learning how to debate and get beyond the labels. And I will say this for Alan Colmes. He was, in many respects, a very doctrinaire liberal. He essentially believed, not because of labels, but because of what he believed in, which were liberal solutions to the problems of life. And he believed that if you were born in poverty, or if you were a single mom struggling with a newborn baby, or if you worked for a big company that was trying to fire you without paying you any adequate severance, all the problems of life. He believed that liberals had the best solutions to those problems. But he didn't take it to the next level, which is that if you had different solutions to those problems, you must be a racist, you must be a bigot, you must be a hater. He was not a man who went in for those kinds of labels. And I shall think of him, and I shall miss particularly his ability to push back when you said something with which he disagreed. And I shall miss most of all the big grin he always used to give at the end to show that you were parting as people who had a policy difference, but you were not parting as people who hated each other. This is a picture of me in the studio with Alan on one of my many appearances on his radio show. As I said, on the TV, the goodbyes were always a lot more rushed because he had to get to the elevator, get to whatever floor it was, and do his radio show. And I'm sorry he had a rushed goodbye for his too short life. Rest in peace, Alan Colmes.